Serious. What was the creepiest unexplainable paranormal thing you saw in the middle of the day? Till this day, when I tell people about my breathing doll, they don't believe me. They just say it was me or my vivid imagination, but my doll breathing was real and one of the most vivid memories of my childhood, especially with unexplained experiences. I first saw the doll at a flea market. I was with my mom and grandmother and fell in love with it. It was a big doll about 14. The only picture I could find was this one under Famousa doll, and it looked just like that one. After begging my mom to buy it and failing, my grandma bought it for me. Man, I loved that doll like it was a real baby. I bought it baby clothes, shoes, bottles and such. Took him everywhere. I named him Rocky. People often thought I was holding my baby brother. Well, one day I was outside playing with Rocky and I was being a little too rough with him, throwing up in the air and letting him fall repeatedly. Scolding him when he wouldn't sit still on my bike. So I got him and threw him as high as I could and tried to catch him, but he slipped through my hands and hit the ground. I picked him up to dust him off, and that's when I heard him breathing. It was heavy and angry and fast, just like someone would sound when they're really pissed. I throw him on the ground and stare at him shaking. Terrified, I leave him on the ground and run inside. My mom asks what's wrong and I tell her what happened. She laughs it off as it was nothing and says I'm being silly and to go and pick up him and bring him inside. I refused to touch him and screamed when she tried to force me. She gave up and picked him up and looked at him and said, "See, he's just a doll, stuffing and plastic, he's not real, he can't breathe." That was the last day I ever played with dolls. I gave him to my brother for a home economics project he had, where you carry around a bag of flour and pretend it's a baby or so some stuff. Anyways, he used its head and attached it to the bag of flour to make it more babyish. He ended up getting extra credit for that. A few years later, the whole Chucky crazy and killer doll movies were all the rage. All the while I had a real demon doll of my own. I too have a demon doll story. My friend and I were 15, and we bought a doll at a yard sale because we were bored, and it was 25 cents, and we thought we could redress it, put makeup on it, and have a punk baby doll for a laugh. Well, we take it home and put some makeup on it and dress it up. We set the doll on the couch with us and watch a movie. Over the course of the movie, the doll started to creep us out. Something made it seem like the doll's facial expression had changed. We figured it was the makeup we painted on the doll, but nevertheless, we were creeped out and decided to put the doll in my room. I wrapped the doll in a sweater and put it in a drawer in my dresser because I didn't want to walk into my room later when I was alone and be scared. Well, later, my friend and I decided to go hang out in my room, and the doll and the sweater I wrapped it in were on the floor. We were home alone and my friend and I didn't leave the living room after we put the doll away. The doll moved by itself. I cried and begged my friend to take the doll with her because I was home alone and didn't want to be alone with the doll. She took it home and over the weekend, it moved by itself twice at her house. She had put the doll in a trunk at the end of her bed and told no one about it. Monday at school, we gave it to this girl in our English class who was dabbling with Satanism. She eventually moved to Oregon, but mailed the doll back to us because it even creeped her out. We burned it and threw it in separate dumpsters across town. Sorry for mobile formatting. There have been more than a few instances in my life that I've had creepy stuff happen, but this one is one I'll always remember as the scariest. 3 years ago, my parents rented a house in the Bay Area, and I was staying with them while I finalized plans on my and my partner's new home. The house had 2 bedrooms that were built with the house and 1 additional room, added on later, which I was staying in. Now, when we moved all their stuff into the garage, we noticed a family before us had built a small mezzanine with a wooden ladder on the wall attached to the house. On the ladder's rungs in green marker is messy writing that says, "Come on up," with an arrow pointing to the top of the mezzanine. And if you climb up, there's a wooden door in the side of the wall in front of the ladder that was also obviously added on after the house was built. On the door is written, "Kids' secret room." The door leads to the attic space. Just to clarify, this is not a room, but just a space in the roof where all the insulation goes. I remember thinking, why would kids play here, and I got a really weird feeling from that door, like something was waiting just out of sight. That night as I was setting up my room, I noticed a hatch in the roof of my closet and got weirded out again. Turns out, it's connected to the attic space behind the mezzanine door in the garage. It reminded me of the closet hatch in the Grudge movie, so I stacked bunch of old file boxes under it so that it was covered up and forgot about it. Flash forward to later that week, I was getting beers from the garage fridge. I didn't bother to turn on the light in the garage, so once the fridge was closed, I was basically in the dark to walk the 4 feet back to the door to the house. And I felt that weird prickly feeling on the back on my neck like you get when you know someone's watching you. I turned to look, and even though I couldn't see anything in the dark, I got the feeling there was something small crouching behind my mom's car watching me, and it was malicious. So I noped right back around and walked as calmly as I could back to the door, and right when I turned the handle, I felt something bump one of the bottles I was holding in my other hand. I fleabing jumped through that door and slammed and locked it and didn't go in there again all night. It's been 2 years since I moved out, and that door and the garage freaked the absolute flurbo out of me to this day. My nieces are living with them there now, and they won't go near the garage either. This is the first time I've recalled this, and it was from my grandmother's recollection because I didn't notice. So my house growing up had a big front room, which went through various different uses, but at this time, it was a lounging room with a couple couches and some decorations. There was also a rocking horse by the window. This happened around mid-afternoon. I believe at the time it was my grandmother, my brother or sister, and myself in the room, and we were playing while she was sitting watching us. Out of nowhere, she stands up quickly, picks us up, and rushes out of the room and closes the door. I had no idea why, because nothing seemed unusual. She told me a little later that while she was watching us, she noticed a rocking horse start moving on its own. There were no open windows, and we weren't next to it. I don't really have any explanation for it other than something paranormal, but this rocking horse used to belong to a woman who passed away, and we believe it could have been her spirit. Other strange things happened with it until we threw it away and never had anything happen in the house again. I was sitting in geography class, the Netherlands, and just paying attention to the fun class of my awesome teacher. There was one person sitting next to me and 2 other classmates in front of us, all just listening to the teacher, and about 28 other kids in the room scattered around. The teacher asked me a geography question, and I start answering it. The whole fleabing class is looking at me. As I am talking about this question, Earth blah blah blah, climates blah blah blah. You know how it goes. Now here comes the weird stuff. The girl in front of me who was looking at me as I'm talking, something happened in the empty space between us. At about eye height. Now it is very hard to describe, and I will try to do my best. Out of nothing, this bright white flash, about 10 centimeters in diameter, appears. It makes this weird grinding noise, kind of like when you rub 2 pieces of styrofoam together. It looked nothing like electricity or anything, but it was so strange. The only way I can explain it is that it kind of looked like that scene in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone where Hermione fixes Harry's glasses. Out of her wand comes this thing that kind of looked like it, but smaller. At this point I was like, WTF, am I having a stroke? Now this thing, it happened for everyone to see, right in front of my face. It left behind some smoke too. It moved like it was morphing, if you can understand that. So I fleabing froze and asked, WTF, did you guys see that? And the people around me including my teacher were like, WTF was that? Everyone in the close vicinity saw it. A very sweet smell emerging from the flash stayed there for weeks after, always felt strange after that. We were kind of baffled and shrugged it off afterwards. I couldn't sleep that night thinking about what it was. Especially because so many other people witnessed it. I used to work in a big old pub that was known to be very haunted. I loved hearing stories about the paranormal but was a bit skeptical. One area that was particularly bad for paranormal experiences was the staff room upstairs, the nearby function room, and the upstairs corridor that ran from the function room to the stairs to the kitchen. During my first few weeks working there, I was walking along the corridor from the function room, heading back to the kitchen after a break, when I heard someone whistle behind me. I was the only one upstairs at the time, and there was no one in the kitchen when I got downstairs. My sister, who worked at this pub for years, had heard someone running up and down this corridor and the stairs before, and now refused to ever go up there. Another time, on my last shift at the pub, I was in the break room eating my lunch. I was messaging my boyfriend on Facebook, so I was distracted but could still see the whole room in front of me. The room layout was like it used to be, 2 separate rooms, but now had been joined by a big archway. I was sat facing this archway into the other side of the room, where only the door wasn't visible. I saw someone, all in black, stride across the other room and then disappear before it reached the window. I thought it was a coworker coming for a break, but realized there had been no footsteps, and that part of the room has incredibly creaky floors, and of course, I was completely alone. Very odd. I've mentioned in previous comments that my childhood home was massively haunted. A lot of the haunting happened during the day, but here's the one that panicked me the most. I was alone watching my brother. I was around 18, he was 2 or 3, barely talking yet. We were in his playroom, a really brightly lit area downstairs, playing with blocks or something when he suddenly goes from giggling and running around to just dead frozen staring at the entryway into the room. I ask him what's up, and he just points to our staircase and says, "Icky noise." He'd been pointing and saying that freaked out randomly for a while now, and I figured it was gonna be another time showing him nothing is there, but I finally take a good look at the stairs, and there's something there. Our staircase was mostly surrounded by walls, so I hadn't noticed at first due to shadow, but I could see crouched on the step just below where the wall cut off, this pitch black shape of a person. It was literally a slightly fuzzy silhouette of a person made of just pure black, clearly looking at us between the hand railing. It took a step further down toward us, still crouched holding the rails, before my brain processed that I was actually seeing it. I screamed, because what other response are you really gonna have to that, grabbed my brother, and hauled butt out of the house. We ended up sitting in the backyard playing with my sister's dog while I called my mom and waited for her to get home. Sightings of that thing only got worse before we moved out. When my brother was a bit older he was able to explain why he called it icky noise, because whenever it showed up, he could hear this really gross scary gurgling whispering. I never heard it make noise, but I definitely saw it several times, and it got rid of my idea that daytime was automatically safe real fast. Rented a house that was built in the early 1800s. It was in a small coastal town in Maryland where everyone knew everyone, except me and my roommate, we just moved in. Landlord was in his mid-70s, he and his wife had just purchased the home a few years earlier as an investment. We were the first tenants for them as they were fixing it up due to it falling into disrepair over the years. We were in the home a few weeks when it became apparent that the locals always asked, "So, you like living there?" It seemed odd because it was a nice corner lot, well landscaped, up-to-date kitchen and renovations, private backyard with wrought iron fencing around the front, very picturesque. The front of the home had old mortar walls and very old, distressed yet refinished wood floors. The middle of the home was actually an addition built around 1950, and the final addition, a large family room and bathroom, was built in 1981. On the second floor were the 3 bedrooms, one in each section of the house with a staircase that started in the kitchen, middle section first floor, and led to the first bedroom in the front section of the house on the second floor. Only one neighbor was actually friendly to us, a woman in her early 50s, a widow, and she lived alone. We asked why everyone was asking if we liked living there. She said, "Matter of fact, it's been abandoned for years, things happen there, no one wants to live there." We were like, WTF. I asked what happened, and she said back when she was little, a boy with mental and physical issues died in the house. Families lived there off and on till the mid-80s, then it was left unoccupied. Thing is, nobody stayed there long, they all seemed to just move out after a few months, maybe a year at the most. We were the first since the early 80s, and this was around 96. We never noticed anything, mostly because we were never home, working during the day then going out at night. We weren't homebodies hanging out. Then it was about 6 to 7 months living there, my roommate came into my bedroom late one night and asked if I had just woken up. He said I was sleepwalking and stood in his doorway. I was never asleep, I was reading a book. Our rooms were at each end of the house, his at the front, mine at the back. I asked, "What did you see?" He said it was a shadow of someone in his doorway, and it backed away when he addressed it, thinking it was me. We both freaked. We searched the house and every door was still locked from the inside. We searched everywhere, windows too. All locked shut. I blew it off as he was just seeing things, he did as well. A week or so later, I was getting ready for work, it was 7 a.m. when there was knocking on my bedroom door. Incessant, loud, aggressive knocking, banging actually. I was pissed, WTF. Opened the fleabing door. The banging continued as I was approaching the door, cussing at what I thought was my roommate. As soon as I grabbed the doorknob and opened the door, the banging stopped and no one there. I mean, within a second. This happened 2 more times to me that same week, both in the morning. My roommate saw the shadow person 1 more time, but this time, it was in the doorway of the 3rd addition of the house. He saw a black shadow move through the kitchen to the back part of the house and just dissipate. We contacted the landlord, but he knew nothing and honestly didn't seem to care. We spoke to the woman across the street, told her what was happening, and she said a family once before had similar complaints, banging on the walls and doors. but also someone or something grabbing their kids and actually leaving bruises. Everyone thought it was possibly child abuse, but the family moved out rather quickly. We get a notice in the mail after living there about 8 months that the landlord passed away and his son is selling the property. We need to move out ASAP. He sent our security deposit and first month's rent back to us as compensation for the short notice. My only paranormal experience in my life. This was a few years ago now. It was early afternoon, probably around 2 p.m. on a Saturday. My dad and I were standing in the kitchen. I was at the counter, a sort of breakfast bar which is higher than the rest, making a sandwich. He was standing behind me and to the left, in the doorway near the fridge. We were having a discussion about something I can't remember when he stops mid-sentence. At this moment I look up from my sandwich and directly to my right is what made him stop speaking, a floor-to-ceiling shadow in a roughly cylindrical shape about 2 feet wide. I immediately turn and face this thing as it swiftly and silently glides straight past me, passing in front of the kitchen window, which it totally obscured the light from, and straight through the wall. I looked at my dad completely speechless but managed to ask if he saw that. He just nodded in response. I walked past him and into the hallway and then went into my parents' room. This thing would have to go through there on its path. Nothing. We spent some time trying to figure out what could have caused a floor-to-ceiling shadow like that. We were entirely stumped, but we've both experienced the paranormal many times before. On an interesting note, this shadow would have passed directly into the master bathroom having gone through the wall in the kitchen that it did. My dad has seen an apparition of his mother-in-law in the doorway of this bathroom before. He also claims that when he was very young, he would see strange little men, sort of like gnomes, in his parents' house, and they were not always friendly. That house still gives me an uneasy feeling. A couple of weeks ago I went across town to visit my mom and my elderly grandpa for a few days. Late at night, everyone has gone to bed. I'm in my old bedroom, my mom is in the one to the right of me, my grandpa is on the left. I'm screwing around on the internet around 3 a.m. with the window open when I hear a voice in the distance out the window. No big deal, some woman could be yelling for any reason. A few minutes later I hear her again, except I realize it's a familiar voice and she's calling a familiar name. It was my mom's voice calling for me. This happens a few times over about 10 minutes, so I decided to double check and look into my mom's bedroom. She's clearly laying on top of her bed asleep. Over the next hour, I hear this voice calling from what sounded like about 200 or 300 feet away in the direction of my backyard, and I consciously ignore it and then go to bed, thinking I was just hallucinating from staying up too late. I tell no one about any of this and move on. End of story, right? The other day, I go back over and my grandpa tells me the last time I was over, he thought he heard a familiar sounding woman that he couldn't quite place, calling around the same time as what I heard, coming from the same general direction. What the flurbo were we hearing?